This is leather. Did you know that the revenue in the leather industry is over $50 billion a year? Did you know that leather was once used as wallpaper? And did you know that products made out of leather date back to over 3000 BC? It used to be a highly guarded secret and passed down from generation to generation. Today on Alley Picked, I'm gonna make my first leather project. So I hope you'll jump in the saddle and come along for the ride. Before I show you how I made my first leather project, I want you to know that I already made it. And I showed the video to an expert leather worker who's got over 25 years of experience. Now, at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you the many suggestions that this expert gave me. So between all my mistakes and his advice, I think you're going to learn a lot about basic leather working in this video. On a recent trip to Spokane, Washington, I just happened to walk past a Tandy leather store. I've never been in one before, but it looked interesting. I always wanted to learn to do some leather work, so this was the perfect chance. I asked the guy who worked there what would be a good first project. For 32 bucks, I purchased a basic leather working book, a card holder and money clip, these 2 tools for setting the rivets, some blue water-based dye, and this leather finishing liquid. And finally, these wool daubers to apply the stain. Inside the kit comes the instructions, a metal clip with a couple of rivets, 2 needles with some waxy thread, 2 pieces of leather with the holes pre-punched, and this black piece of fake leather. The first thing I'm going to do is dye the leather. This freezer paper works great because it's paper on one side and wax on the back so the dye won't soak through. After applying it to the leather, you'll see that it soaks in quickly, like it's almost drying immediately, but it's not. It remains wet for a while. The next day, I applied a second coat. The following day, I applied the finish using a foam brush. Apparently, the dye still hadn't completely dried because it streaked and the dye came off. The finish dried extremely fast and it was too late to do anything about it. I had to leave it and chalk it up to a lesson learned. There's really only 3 steps to this project: dyeing the leather, attaching the money clip, and then stitching it together. To attach the metal clip, the kit comes with 2 rivets. Each rivet has 2 parts. One piece has a stem and the other is a cap. Push the piece with the stem through the hole in the metal and through the leather. Rest this on the concave disc. Place the cap on. The metal rod is concave on one end. This goes over the cap where you're going to pound it with a hammer, securing the 2 pieces tightly together with the leather and clip sandwiched in between. I watched one video where the guy said you didn't need the disc on the bottom and you could just pound it on a flat surface. I tried that, it didn't work too good for me as the rivet shifted a little. To cover the metal clip on the inside, they provide this piece of fake leather. I'm using contact cement to glue it down. The last step in the process is to stitch both halves of the leather together. I start by lining up the holes and clamping it together. This vise isn't ideal, but for now it's the best I've got. To thread the needle, put one end through the eyelet. Here I'm poking the needle through the center of the string. It's easier than you might think. This makes a small loop which you're going to pull down over the dangling thread. Now pull this dangling tail and the knot's going to slip towards the eyelet. Do this on both ends of both needles. Thread one needle through the first hole and even up the needles with equal lengths of thread on both sides. Take one needle and push it through the second hole. And with the second needle, I'm going to go through the second hole also, but only this time in the reverse direction. Be careful not to puncture the string, but rather pass through the same hole adjacent to the existing string in the hole. This process will be repeated all the way around. After finishing the last hole, one option is to backtrack through a couple of the holes and snip off the excess. So there you have it, my first leatherworking project. It's a card holder and a money clip. And if I get 1 million views on this video, I just might have a little more money to put there. Anyway, the video that you just saw, I first showed it to a leatherworking expert with over 25 years of experience, Bob. He gave me some invaluable feedback based on his experience. And after talking to Bob, I came away with some major lessons learned. So grab your pen and paper, because here we go. Number 1, dyeing the leather. I would avoid using these water-based products. I found that it left my leather a little bit too stiff. According to the expert, he says that he uses a product called Phoebings, and it's an alcohol-based dye. It provides a beautiful, rich finish, and he exclusively uses that product. Secondly, he recommends pre-treating the leather. So you could take a damp sponge or a spray bottle, apply it to the leather, let it dry and come back to its natural color, and then you can put on your dye. The third thing about dyeing, he told me, was don't soak the dauber. Apply it in lesser amounts until you get the color you want. You can always put more on, but you can't take it off. And finally, after the dye is completely dry, buff it with a clean, dry cloth. Now keep buffing until the surface is all shiny and even. One of the reasons that my color came off when I applied the finish was because I didn't buff it after it dried. Number 2, setting the rivets. Each of the rivets has 2 pieces. It's got a cap that's round, and it's got a post that's flat on the bottom. Your rivet setting tool also has 2 parts. The rivet anvil, which is flat on one side and concave on the other, and the rivet setting tool, which is also flat on one side and concave on the other. So when setting your rivet, you want to put the flat side of the anvil facing up. Your post will then sit on top. The flat part of the post sits on the flat part of the anvil. The concave part of this tool sits on the cap. You'll whack them together and it secures your work in place. Now I just happen to get lucky with mine and have the decorative part, or the cap, facing on the outside. Number 3, the stitching. Now, not that I did anything extremely wrong, but there were a lot of suggestions that Bob had that would have made this even better. The part of the thread that goes through the hole is called the tag end. The other part is the working end. I mistakenly put the needle through the working end instead of the tag end. Now both will work, I just ended up with a longer tag end. I used a 2 needle stitch and started at the end. Now Bob suggests using a single stitch and starting in the middle. You see, because the end here, that's a stress point and the stitch can loosen over time. So what he recommends is start at the base, work your way up with a single stitch until you get all the way to one end, and then backtrack, go all the way to the other end, and then come down and meet back in the middle. Then you can overlap your stitches and even burn the ends to keep them from pulling out. Also, when I was stitching, I was worried that my needle was going to poke through the existing thread. Now Bob said that that's actually okay. It might be a good thing. It might make the stitch a little stronger. And finally, when your product is all finished, you can take a hammer, tap down the stitches. That way it gives it a nice, finished, even look. And now just a few final thoughts. The instructions that come with your kit are very basic. They don't go into depth at all about gluing the leather, dyeing the leather, or stitching the leather. Another thing that I've learned is that there's a special cutoff tool that rounds the edges, and then a second tool called a bone folder that smooths them out. So you might want to look into those as well. Finally, don't beat yourself up if the project doesn't look exactly like you intended. It takes a lot of time to get good at this. So practice, practice, practice. And I also suggest taking a class if it's available in your area. It's easier to talk to somebody in person and ask a lot of questions than watching a video. So thanks for watching Alley Pick. I hope you learned something, because I sure did, and I had a good time doing it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and if you want to be notified of future videos, click on the bell. I gotta head off to an estate sale, so until next time, I'll meet you in the alley. But today on Alley Pick, I'm gonna make my... Thank you. Thanks.